What's going on out there? This is Venus Love, and guess what? I'm back. So, I want to talk about something I feel is not talked enough about. With the rise of queerness and other forms of diversity in media, I feel there are a lot of loose ends. And this video is a little more personal to me. It kind of hits me really deeply, and I felt like a lot of things needed to be said. And so this video, it's going to be straightforward. I'm going to add a little bit of facts, a little bit of statistics, but also my personal experience living as a queer and black person myself. Okay? So, bi erasure. Okay? I want to talk a little bit about what it means, how it affects bi or pan people, even, as well as how and why it is happening both in media and in the real world. What prompted me to make this video was that I had recently come into terms with the fact that I am not only non binary, but I'm also bisexual, maybe even pansexual. But regardless, I like more than one gender. This was a fight of mine for many years, both inside of myself and in the outside world. I went through a pendulum of trying to figure out, was I straight? Was I a lesbian? I identified as bi-curious, but I just couldn't get myself to identify as bisexual. Part of the reason, of course, was my internalized biphobia, obviously. Biphobia describes the fear, the intolerance, or hatred one has towards bisexuals. And I internalized it, especially because a lot of people around me didn't like bisexual people. Neither the gay people nor the straight people, but that was in like the 2000s. Showing my age here, but yeah. But another part of the reason was that bisexuality just didn't exist around me, at least not in the open. Most of the people in my circle were either lesbian or straight. Not to mention, TV's really done a number on stigmatizing bi-ness and removing it from any narrative involving queerness. So, to add, many people around me didn't really know what it meant to be bi. I didn't even know what it really meant to be bi back in the day. I think the best definition of bi is by Robin Knox. I think that's how you pronounce her name. But anyway, this is what she states. She said, I acknowledge in myself the potential to be attracted romantically and or sexually to people of more than one gender, not necessarily at the same time, in the same way, or to the same degree. So, now that I broke down that definition, let's talk about what bi erasure is. Bi erasure is a lack of acknowledgement and ignoring of the clear evidence that bisexuals exist. Bi erasure is often in line with the term bi invisibility. Bisexual invisibility is the tendency to ignore, remove, falsify, or re explain evidence of bisexuality. In its extreme form, bisexual erasure can include denying that bisexuality exists. There are certain things that lead to bi erasure. Bi erasure involves maybe mislabeling a character or a real life person when they show obvious signs of bi plus feelings, or omitting the topic of bisexuality or bi romance from a conversation about characters, media, events, or discussions. It can also include ignoring or removing bisexual or biromantic evidence while discussing a story or a real historical figure, as well as excluding bi people from contributing to characterization, media, events, or discussions. After doing research on bi erasure, I discovered some interesting perspectives that break down why this might occur. According to the document that came out in 2000 called The Epistemic Contract by Kenji Yoshino on bi erasure, he breaks down how and why bi erasure might occur. Let's discuss his first part. In his first part, he explains, quote, after defining bisexual invisibility, I show that bisexuals, under any plausible definition of bisexuality, are much less socially and politically visible than homosexuals. End quote. You would think it would have had to do with less people being bisexual, but Yoshino breaks down an interesting find. He states, quote, two things are surprising about such an investigation. First, to my knowledge, no one has previously made such a systemic comparison. Second, when such an investigation is actually made, it reveals that each of the major sexuality studies demonstrates that the number of bisexuals is greater than or comparable to the number of homosexuals. This suggests that bisexual invisibility is not a reflection of the fact that there are fewer bisexuals than there are monosexuals in the population, but is rather a product of social erasure. End quote. In part 2 of the contract, Yoshino then goes on to explain why bi erasure might occur in totality. He stated, quote, the two dominant sexual orientation groups, self-identified straights and self-identified gays, have shared investments in that erasure. It is as if these two groups, despite their other virulent disagreements, have agreed that bisexuals will be made invisible. I call this the epistemic contract of bisexual erasure. To support the existence of such a contract, I adduce evidence that self-identified straights and self-identified gays both deploy the same three strategies of bisexual erasure: class erasure, individual erasure, and delegitimation. End quote. In part 3, he describes the investments that both self-identified straights and self-identified gays have in bi erasure. These are, and I quote, 1. An interest in stabilizing sexual orientation. 2. An interest in retaining sex as a dominant metric of differentiation. And 3. An interest in defending norms of monogamy. He states, and I quote, I disaggregate each interest into its three components. 1. The component shared by both straights and gays. 2. The component held only by straights. And 3. The component held only by gays. The component of that interest shared by both straights and gays is an interest in knowing one's place in the social order. Both straights and gays value this knowledge because it relieves them of the anxiety of identity interrogation. End quote. In other words, it relieves people who are monosexual from having to question their own sexuality, right? He further explains a little bit more about the interests of straights and gays. Quote, straights have a more specific interest in ensuring the stability of heterosexuality because that identity is privileged. Less intuitively, gays also have a specific interest in guarding the stability of homosexuality insofar as they view that stability as the predicate for the immutability defense or for effective political mobilization. The final interest that monosexuals have in bisexual erasure is an interest in defending norms of monogamy. Both straights and gays share this interest, as the dominant ethic of contemporary American society favors dyadic relationships. Straights may have a particular interest in this insofar as the form of non-monogamy associated with bisexuals has been connected to, certain infections with bisexual promiscuity, acting as a bridge between the infected gay population and the uninfected straight population. Gays may have a particular interest in monogamy insofar as they seek to assimilate into mainstream society. Bisexuality threatens all of these interests because bisexuals are often perceived to be intrinsically non-monogamous. End quote. So those are just a few details coming from his epistemic contract document that kind of lays the groundwork for why a lot of bi erasure tends to occur, why bisexuals tend to be invisible, and how monosexuals, both straights and gays, play a role in keeping our group invisible. The document does go into more detail regarding bisexuality and bi erasure. While it did come out in 2000, it is still true of today's society, unfortunately. I do plan to do a deep dive into the document on this channel at a later date and how it still applies to the everyday world. So trust me, this is only the beginning. But for the sake of speaking about bi erasure, I wanted to just focus on those points specifically. To be frank, though, the epistemic contract now does have another official term to describe it, and that's monosexism. Monosexism is another term used to describe biphobia. It is a system of oppression that encourages the belief that a person cannot or even should not be attracted to more than one gender. So now that I've broken down some of the ways bi erasure can take form and why, I'm going to be discussing how it plays out in our everyday lives, starting with the media. Today, more than ever before, there's a call for companies to be more diverse and inclusive on television, in movies, and even in toy companies. Even more so, there is a call to revive or reboot old material with a new modern face, bringing in a more diverse coat over old shows, books, movies, and old toys. This includes an increase in LGBTQ plus representation. But some of these new or rebooted materials that are supposed to be representative of the LGBTQ plus community haven't exactly been done with nuanced perspectives in mind, especially when it comes to bisexuality on screen. This is especially so when it comes to characters that have shown visual characteristics of bisexuality on screen, yet are often mislabeled as gay or lesbian regardless of the history of said character. As mentioned before, this is the exact definition of bi erasure: re explaining, mislabeling, or even removing bisexuality from the narrative despite the history of said characters that was created. And while I'm aware that creators have the right to label their characters how they see fit in fiction categories, even if a creator or news company has labeled a character straight, gay, or lesbian, we have the right to highlight the damaging ways in which bi characteristics are being misrepresented, underrepresented, or ignored from the conversation surrounding that fictional character. Fictional characters often reflect the imagination of people, which is the difference in how fiction characters should be approached versus real people. Sure, real people, we of course should respect their identities within reason. But when it comes to fictional interpretations, a lot of times it's based off of perception. And it's because of this that we must address it. Perception affects reality. So let's share some examples here of what I'm talking about. Let's talk about the movie Blue is the Warmest Color, which came out back in the early 2010s. It was said to be a film about lesbian sexuality where the main character, Adele, goes about exploring her own sexuality after finding the girl in blue hair, Emma, attractive. Of course, one thing led to another, and the two ended up developing a romantic relationship. Now, this is just a spoiler alert about this movie. Their relationship does not end well, okay? Why doesn't it end well? Because Adele slept with the guy she works with named Antoine more than once, okay? IndieWire breaks down the perspective of filmmaker Paulina Plazas on her view of this movie that is hailed as a so-called lesbian film. In IndieWire, Paulina said something very insightful. Quote, Blue is the Warmest Color was recently added to Netflix's library under the lesbian and gay section. But is this a lesbian film? It seemed to have gone completely unnoticed by critics and audiences alike that Adele, the young woman at the center of the story, is not gay. She is in fact bisexual, but bisexuals don't get a category in Netflix. Problem number one. Back in 2014, one of the biggest streaming services online used to classify every queer love movie under the lesbian and gay section. So of course, everyone was going to think that every person in this movie is either gay or lesbian, right? IndieWire continues, quote, the film begins with a classroom discussion. Adele's assignment is to think about the idea of predestination and love at first sight. As destiny would have it, she crosses paths with Emma, a mysterious blue-haired beauty. Amazement registers on her face. Time stops, and voila, it is love at first sight. And yet Adele then starts dating a boy named Thomas. One might think that she dates him due to peer pressure, but director Abdellatif, I'm not sure if I spelled that right, but the director makes sure we follow Adele's point of view as she checks him out. She is attracted to him, but their first, night together is disappointing at best. Adele can't get Emma out of her head, and she begins, feeling herself while dreaming of Emma, you know. Struggling to come to terms with her own feelings, she becomes depressed, and what follows is one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the movie. Adele is aggressively confronted by her friends who suspect she might be a lesbian. Her reply: I won't admit to something I am not. Is this just repression of her true lesbianism? Or is it in fact an authentic attempt to defend her attraction to men and women? End quote. The writer also mentions how Adele doesn't talk about her partner to her coworkers, but it doesn't seem to be the product of a hostile environment. The article states that Adele was madly in love with a woman, but that didn't mean she ceased interest in men. Perhaps it is public judgment about bisexuality which stops Adele from saying anything. Then the article goes on to speak more about this movie, and I quote, this raises another important point. How does a bisexual come out of a Narnia-sized closet? It isn't enough to declare who you are. You must then justify your own existence to the world. Adele chooses not to explain herself, but in the process remains an outsider to both gay and straight cultures. From her first visit to a lesbian bar to the home-cooked meals she makes for Emma's friends, she remains on the fringe of her partner's universe. The major conflict in the second half of the film develops as this disconnection proves to be too much for their relationship. Emma becomes interested in another woman, and Adele cheats repeatedly on Emma with a man, ending their love affair. In a society that loves to oversimplify, one can see Adele's relationship with men as cries for help. She is a lesbian in denial who deals with this by sleeping with men. But describing her in such a way would be diminishing what it is to have a certain preference in the first place. Defining her story as a lesbian story is stripping Adele of her own choices. She is not confused. She is bi. Every turn is part of the same road. End quote. Paulina goes on to say more about this, and I think this is a very interesting read. She states, quote, think back then to the opening scene and the question of love and predestination, viewed through the lens of bisexuality. Blue is the warmest color, looks like a film pointing out that for some people, the gender of their eventual partner is never preordained. End quote. I think Paulina gives another one of the best reasons why bi people are erased. Society oversimplifies for the sake of making things easier for themselves. Speaking of oversimplification, let's talk about an animated example of bi erasure in children's media. Recently, the Rugrats had a reboot, and for those of you who used to follow my channel, I am a big fan of 90s nostalgia and the Rugrats. But in the process of this reboot, one of the characters does get the bi erasure treatment, and that is Betty DeVille. Betty DeVille is the mom of Phil and Lil, the bug-eating twins from the Rugrats series. She was married to Howard DeVille, whom she renewed her vows with in All Grown Up the sequel. Despite the fact that Howard and Betty were opposites, her being a more forthright tomboy while him being more feminine and passive, when they were around each other, they genuinely showed love for each other. When the new Rugrats reboot dropped, however, not only was Howard erased from the picture, but suddenly Betty was branded as the lesbian. So I guess her being married and in love with Howard meant nothing. Huh. What's even more telling is how so many assumed that Betty was always a lesbian, and that Howard was the beard in their relationship in the first place. Not surprising, because these are the same damaging stereotypes people have of bi people whenever they are in a relationship with someone who isn't of the same gender, especially if they are gender non-conforming, like myself. But the fact that Nickelodeon went about affirming these damaging ideas is the real problem. They treated bisexuality as non-existent from start to finish, and never gave thought to the irresponsible way in which they portray queer people that date the opposite gender. And yet you wonder why biphobia relationships are so prominent. Nobody wants to feel like the beard in their relationships and are afraid that by dating bi, pan, or ace people that is what is going on. Yet this is the narrative Nickelodeon chose to create about people like Betty or Howard who date other genders. Just reflects the narrow understanding people have of what it means to be LGBTQIA+ in the first place. After all, lesbians and gay men are not the only people that make up this community. The portrayals of Betty is misleading and honestly disrespectful towards bisexuality, basically shotting on the idea that a queer woman can in fact date and marry men and still be queer. This is not the only instance of bi erasure in media in recent years. Take Willow from Buffy the Vampire Slayer as another example. In the past, she had a strong relationship with Oz. But as we see with the reboot, she falls in love with a woman, which is great. But she was equally rebranded as the lesbian. In both Betty and Willow's cases, the excuses were always, we could make a gay character back then, so yeah. Yet, that still is not an excuse as to why you portrayed these characters with romantic feelings for men. Evidently, you could have just made them single back then to avoid giving a misleading representation, but you didn't. Because you've already created a confusing narrative that these two characters were in love with men, and you had no context behind it in the show before you decided that they were lesbian, what it ends up looking like is that these women were confused or insecure to the general public. Rather than continue the type of stereotypes that damage our communities, you could have portrayed a queer woman who simply just likes more than one gender. Instead, you resorted to the monosexist stereotypes that manage to undermine bisexual and pansexual people every single time. Creators who do this don't even consider how this portrayal would reflect the bi-pan community as a whole, because the default is monosexuality. If they aren't straight, they must be gay. If they aren't gay, they must be straight. Portrayals like this are the reason people don't take bi people seriously. Why people think our partners are the beard in our relationships. Why people are afraid to date bi people because you hardly ever have a show with a coming out story that doesn't end with, I faked it all. Getting back to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. After the bi community rallied to speak on the bi erasure of Willow, Joss Whedon had this to say. He stated, and I quote, "Okay, you can't make Willow bi. You can't say this is a phase, because that's what people do to deny their existence," Whedon says. "So if I did it now, I'd be like, yes, she can be bi, because some people are. But back then, it was like, no, we're not ready for that." Sounds like part of the reason he didn't make Willow bi is because he didn't want it to seem like a phase. Yet that is exactly what he made Willow look like. That her feelings for Oz was just a phase. Oh, I see. He was, protecting his fellow monosexuals. Can't forget that epistemic contract, right? Anyway, the interesting part about Buffy's creator is that he felt that society was not ready for a story about bisexuality, and that the only acceptable way to show a queer person was if they were monosexual. It just goes to show you that bi people are still seen as being a controversial topic, but it is also why portrayals like Betty's and Willow's are damaging. It delegitimizes our experiences of liking more than one gender and paints the picture that we are not queer enough, nor LGBTQ unless we are monosexual. It paints the picture that our experiences are just a phase until we fall somewhere on the far side of the spectrum. Mind you, it's not the fact that they have found love in the same gender that's the problem. It's in the language used to describe them that is the problem. These are not the only instances in which bi erasure has occurred. Think about Velma from Scooby-Doo, who has showed interest in both genders. Wonder Woman, who's clearly showed interest in both genders but is being branded as straight. Apple and Darling from Ever After High, who are constantly being branded as lesbian even though they both have shown interest in both genders, okay? Darling on her profile in the romantic section says she likes boys. That means she likes both genders, okay? That doesn't seem gay to me. And even Maddie from Liv and Maddie, like Dove Cameron actually erased her own character. She erased her own character, Maddie. Maddie clearly was in love with Diggy, and yet Dove Cameron is branding her own character as the lesbian. What, because she's a tomboy? That makes no sense. Anyway, even Betty and Veronica in Riverdale. And I mean, Riverdale has its own problems, but Betty and Veronica, that whole kissing scene, what was that? What was that? Anyway, the list really goes on. These are all characters that have showed attraction to both genders, yet are being branded as straight, gay, or lesbian. Most of the time, they are branded straight or gay for any other reason other than who they're attracted to. Anyway, while the main reason for these lackluster portrayals of queer characters stems mostly from ignorance, Joss Whedon's statement is proof that some of it comes from monosexism. Straight people usually just hate anything queer. They think we're all part of some gay agenda to convert their families while they try to be straight, as if any agenda ever worked in the first place. I mean, straight people have been trying to push their agenda for millennia, yet the queer is still here. And yet, gay people equally don't want bi people in media because they mistakenly believe that we are more privileged than them and that our portrayals in media will be encouraging heteronormativity, which comes from the biphobic idea that bisexuals are not truly queer in the eyes of some gay people, and thus not as in need of the resources or privileges gay people are advocating for. Again, this is where the modern epistemic contract comes into play. Even though straight and gay people are not directly working together to erase us, many straight and gay people have a mutual need to keep bi people from being an influence, especially in visual media. If a bi character ends up with the same gender, they're queer baiting or part of some agenda. If they end up with the opposite gender, then they're somehow regressive. Honestly, bi people's portrayals can't appease anyone. This is why what Joss Whedon said actually rings true. The world is actually not comfortable with bi people on screen. To be honest, they aren't comfortable with it in the real world. Yet that is all the more reason why we need better representation. The worst part is whenever we do finally get a bi character, they're often treated like an afterthought for tokenism or based on a stereotype about bi people. We all know straight characters tend to most often get lead roles in media, more often than any LGBTQ plus character. Yet this is even happening in queer media when there are two or more queer characters. The gay lesbian characters are usually the more profound and more popular character in the series, while the less memorable and profound queer characters tend to be the stock bi character just for the sake of saying, hey, look, we have representation. In other words, if a straight person is not there to fill the role, then a gay person is the next stepping stone. Either that or they're branded as straight girls making out. You know? Riverdale. Anyway, ironically, the so-called profound characters that get branded as lesbian or gay show more bisexual tendencies than the bisexuals themselves. This just shows how little representation truly matters to these companies and to people in general. I mean, think about Scream TV's Audrey. I mean, she is bi, she claims to be bisexual, but she doesn't really show many bisexual tendencies. Just saying. Oftentimes, when it comes to bi characters, we're left wondering if they are or aren't bi, while the creators claim it's somehow true for the purpose of queer baiting. Worse yet, sometimes the bi relationships never seem to last surrounding the character. Their introduction to queerness is still being painted superficially rather than genuinely. I've always said it and I'll say it again. I don't just want representation. I want good representation. I want clear representation. What is the point of having diversity and inclusivity or representation if you're going to misrepresent it? Mind you, most of the examples I've mentioned are in regards to women. When it comes to men and boys, bisexuality is even more narrow, okay? Even when companies would have had a chance to create a bisexual story, they often resort to tired stereotypes about queer men. Here's the story. Boy meets girl. Boy is confused. Boy fakes his love for girl, but he's secretly gay. Boy comes out and dumps girl or cheats on girl because he likes men. I mean, with narratives like these, it is no wonder why bisexual men are constantly seen as insincere, cheaters, or confused. I can guarantee you that the amount of bi men in media you can probably count on one hand. And when they are there, a lot of times their bisexuality is painted in more binary terms, gay or straight, and in some cases only addressed in words rather than in actions. Needless to say, you will probably hardly ever see bi men in stable relationships without being created as, provocative or unfaithful. Lucifer, anyone? Right. Unfortunately, even if they did end up with just one gender, people would still assume they're gay or straight. Can I also mention that most of the bi male characters are portrayed as shady anti-heroes? Does anyone see a pattern here? I think this is an important point to make. By painting bisexuals, especially by men, as immoral or ethically challenged, this gives monosexist people a reason to erase bisexuality and make them feel good about their erasure. After all, no one wants to see problematic people on screen. Therefore, by making bi people the socially problematic character on screen, we give fuel to biphobia and encourage the erasure of bi people, even in real life. Of course, more creators are creating more bi male characters, yet bi male characters are still being painted as gay or straight, or it seems like these companies just can't bring themselves to call the male character as he is. For example, recently, Robin from DC Comics now has a male love interest. Now, we know Robin in the past has shown interest in women, and the creator stated that Tim Drake's feelings for both, are pretty genuine. He liked women genuinely, he liked men genuinely. Yet you have articles that insinuate that he is gay when he has been shown otherwise. What doesn't make it better is that the creators are also leaving his sexuality ambiguous. And while I don't usually have a problem with this, to be honest, I prefer no labels on characters, which I'll talk about that at a later date too. But the way it is being phrased by the creator is as if he is just confused right now, like he's just figuring himself out. Not surprised, because that is the typical stereotype affiliated with being bi. Why can't it just be that he knows what he likes, he just doesn't want to put a label on it? He loves people. I mean, anything. But here we go, he's still trying to figure it out. Ugh. I felt the same issue with Jack Sparrow. Jack is clearly sexually attracted to women, yet people in the past and even today insist that he was a gay pirate because of his gender expression. Here we go again. Even Johnny Depp himself used the general term gay to describe his character while simultaneously portraying the pirate flirting with women and even having affairs with them. You see the disrespect here? Movies like Brokeback Mountain is often lauded as a movie about gay men, which almost seems to ignore the bisexuality of one of its characters, Anus. In the book, it was Jack that hooked up with other women, but Anus hooked up with another woman in the movie. Regardless, both men are shown in some way attracted to women and each other. And let's not forget that Call Me By Your Names movie, That movie almost seems to erase the bisexuality of Elio from the book. If any of you have ever read the book, spoiler alert, Elio clearly states he has fantasies about both Margia and Oliver. Even the author confirmed Elio was bi, yet here we are calling it a gay movie. I mean, Luca, the author himself, submitted Elio Perlman into the Invisible Bi Characters Tumblr. I mean, if the author thinks that the characters being bi erased, I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, this is coming from the notions of people who not only don't think of bisexuality when thinking about men, but also the notion that it doesn't exist in men, or even that it is something to be ashamed of if you are a man. Take the show Sex and the City, for example. I mean, I really don't have to say much. The memes kind of speak for themselves on this. But yeah, that show did a lot of damage in painting bi men as double dipping or as being insincere. It was toxic all the way around. But I digress. Even in the world of Japanese anime, bisexual male characters are very hard to find. And y'all know anime is filled with queerness, okay? I think the only openly bi male characters I've seen in anime is Toya and Shaoran from Cardcaptor Sakura. If y'all know any more bisexual characters in anime outside of the Clamp universe, please recommend it in the comment section. Because I'm starved. I'm starved, okay? When I think about the reason why people like Lil Nas X get so much support, it's because the most powerful queer LGBTQ people are gay men. The truth behind media's modern portrayals is that white gay men are actually running the industry we call Hollywood behind the scenes, which actually gives them more creative power over LGBTQ narratives. They're your creative designers, your directors, your makeup artists, writers, actors, producers, singers, choreographers, etc. They're some of the richest people in the world, especially in America. This means gay men are in control of the queer narratives, for better or worse. This is not to say that companies are not by and large being run by straight people, though. Straight people are clearly at the top of the food chain. which means any forms of suppression usually is first and foremost in their control. But gay white men, especially, have a lot more privilege than the rest of the LGBTQ plus community, especially in media. And so it is easier for them to create narratives for other LGBTQ plus people, especially gay men. I mean, why do you think gay men are the most visible in media compared to other LGBTQIA plus people? The levels of privilege actually has an effect on how people are seen and treated. Because monosexuality is woven into the fabric of society, only monosexual stories matter, or at least to society matters more. This is why visual media tends to turn out the way it does. The solution to this problem is not exactly cut and dry. I think the best thing to do is to be considerate and aware of who you are representing and how. I know that most people are writers or who are artists just simply want to tell a story, and not all are intentionally trying to erase bi people. However, my purpose is to point out how our understanding of people is often based on social and cultural norms that have been taught. Some of these norms, while outdated, can be hard to peel because it's so embedded in our society, even in the smallest of ways. Yet these can lead us to subconsciously discriminate, even if unintended. That is why awareness is so important, so that when you're creating stories about queer people, you're doing it with less bias and more understanding. Now that we have an understanding of bi-erasure in media, let's talk about the bi-erasure of history. This type of erasure can involve erasure of recorded evidence of bisexual contact in history. Mind you, historical figures who are no longer here with us can only be speculated as to what their true attractions were. However, my issue is that even when a historical figure has historical records showing attraction to people of more than one gender, bisexuality is still never considered in modern conversations regarding their sexuality. Back in the day, there weren't too many labels when it came to sexuality. There would be more of an emphasis on one's actions rather than one's identity, as sexuality didn't define a person the way it does now. The only right way to be was hetero anyway. I mean, anything other than that was either pederasty, rites of passage, like in ancient Greece and Japan, or against the law. Yeah. Yet whenever a historical figure had a history of being queer in any way, the modern conversation is often monosexual in speculation of that person's sexuality, with terms like gay, lesbian, or straight being thought of instead. Some of the historical figures that are queer have often been branded as straight, gay, or lesbian in fictional representation of their lives as well in Hollywood, even if the person has shown tendencies toward bisexuality. This is where Hollywood tends to paint our history while erasing bisexuality from it. A good example of this is Achilles. The most recent portrayals of Achilles has shown him as a straight man or a gay man. Yet before the Trojan War, he was actually one of the suitors of Helen, who swore to defend her if she was stolen from her husband, no matter which of them was chosen as her husband. During the Trojan War, he quarreled with Agamemnon when Agamemnon took Briseis. This was a woman Achilles actually took as a captive to make her into a concubine of his, or a wife of his. I mean, he was trying to make that girl his. However, Achilles' relationship with Patroclus has literally been talked about for centuries, where ancient Greek philosophers actually argued over which one was the Arestes, basically the protector or the top, and who was the Eraminos, who was basically the beloved or the bottom. You know what I mean? These terms were usually used for pederastic relationships between that of an adult male and a young male. But both Patroclus and Achilles were adults. In this case, Achilles shows a lot of signs of being bisexual based on the definition. Yet somehow he is portrayed as straight or gay. This goes back to what I said about how only monosexual people get to be lead characters, even if the story is supposed to be about real or mythical historical figures written in history. The reality is that in Hollywood, monosexuality is more valued, respected, and deemed as more morally right in comparison to bisexuality. Therefore, a lead character, or the most important characters, are better off monosexual in the eyes of Hollywood and the public, even if these people are real historical figures, and their history shows otherwise. Another example is Oscar Wilde, whom is often branded as being gay, even though he showed interest in women and men historically. Oscar Wilde was recorded being romantically interested in Florence Balcom at one time, and was even disappointed that she married Bram Stoker, the creator of Dracula. A part of the complete letters of Oscar Wilde goes into detail about this. He also fell in love with Constance Mary Wilde, whom he eventually married and had 2 sons by. Mind you, he was fascinated by pederasty and was involved in what was called homosexual acts at the time, to which he went to trial for. But again, he showed interest in both genders, which sounds pretty bi to me. Some might wonder why I'm making such a big deal about this. Why is it so important to separate the difference between bi people and gay and straight people? While it may not seem like a problem to differentiate bi people from monosexuals, let me tell you a story about a couple of women who were lovers. Alice Jessie Mitchell was a lesbian woman by all accounts who was in love with a lady, Frederica Ward, in the late 1800s. They would often write letters to each other that revealed their feelings for each other. One day they decided to elope, with Alice dressing like a man so that they could get married. However, their mission was discovered and compromised by Ada Volkmore, who was Frida's sister and surrogate mother at the time. And Ada sent a letter to Alice and her mother to stay away from Frida. This led Alice into a depressive spiral and eventually led to Alice getting rid of Frida, if you know what I mean. Alice's reasons for doing it was that she loved Frida and felt that if she couldn't have her, no one should. Now, I know you're wondering why I'm bringing up this story. I bring it up because this story is often painted as a story of lesbians in love with a tragic ending. I see pictures of the two circled throughout lesbian spaces as proof of lesbianism and the ever-branding of the butch aesthetic in order to cover up one's orientation. It's even planned to have its own movie. But what is often left out of the discord is that Frida was actually bisexual. You see, she wasn't as interested in Alice as Alice was her, probably because she sensed how insane Alice was. And Frida was actually interested in 2 other men besides Alice at the early stages of their relationship, and that was Ashley Roselle and Harry Bilger, especially Ashley. She even gave Ashley her picture. This is actually one of the reasons Alice became jealous and possessive of Frida. Mind you, Alice and Frida weren't even officially dating or anything before Frida encountered Ashley. Yet Alice felt her feelings were more important than Frida's and would eventually propose to Frida, but also threatened her own life should Frida not comply. Sounds like coercion to me? Ironically, if they did have a movie, I'm sure this will be erased from the narrative. But it is the truth. Yet so many attempt to erase the history of bisexuals even when the story needs to be told. In this case scenario, it is one of the first instances of bi-abuse, recorded based on bi-distrust from a monosexual lover. Needless to say, statistics show that bisexual people have a higher chance of being abused in domestic partnerships. Yet this story, which could actually help to point out the injustices bisexual people had to endure, it is painted as a tragically romantic lesbian story of true love. This is why I say bi erasure is damaging. At its worst, it can erase truth for a narrative that only benefits the monosexuals while undermining bisexuals, thus continuing bigotry, discrimination, and even abuse when it comes to bisexual people. Speaking of statistics, research for bisexual people has also been subject of bi erasure. According to Dr. Brian Dodge on bi.org, he stated this, quote, "A major limitation of most early health research on lesbian, gay, and bisexual populations is that it was based on combined samples of participants with no attention to separating out sexual identities, particularly in terms of bisexual people. Rarely, however, have the experiences and lives of bisexual people, who comprise more than half of the entire LGBT community, been explicitly considered in the social or legal narrative. Rather, bisexual people are frequently swept into the greater lesbian, gay, and bisexual community, their specific disparities made invisible within data about the LGBT community as a whole." End quote. It is important to separate bi research from straight people and queer monosexuals so that people can get a better understanding of our lived experience and so we can get the help and resources that we need. LGBTmap.org has a breakdown of the disparities called the invisible majority. It breaks down the health disparities that bi people have in comparison to their straight, lesbian, and gay peers. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 40% of bisexual high school students seriously consider attempting, ending their life, compared to 30% of gay and lesbian students and 12% of heterosexual students. Increased levels of violence as well. Bi people face shocking rates of intimate partner violence, domestic violence, gape, and assault. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention report that 46% of bisexual women have been gaped, as well as 17% of heterosexual women and 13% of lesbian women. Bisexual students, too, suffer high levels of assault on campus, and bisexual people in places of incarceration report high rates of violence at the hands of staff and other inmates. More must be done to prevent violence and provide housing and recovery service for bisexual people seeking services. Even when it comes to physical health, bisexuals have a lot of issues, including struggling to seek help due to facilities not being as open or bi-specific. I really encourage you all to read the Invisible Majority document on lgbtmap.org for more information. I may do a deep dive on it in the future just to break down all the disparities that we have. But this just goes to show you why bi erasure is such a problem. According to other studies recorded in 2016, bisexual people earned less than their monosexual counterparts as well in the job force. Studies showed that discrimination played a part in that statistic. According to Miz on NBC Out, he stated, all non-heterosexual individuals face negative stereotypes and sometimes discrimination. However, bisexual men and women face additional stereotypes that can be particularly disadvantaging. End quote. Miz continues by saying, quote, one thing that has driven an increase in social acceptance of gay men and lesbian women is an increase in perceptions that they are a sexual orientation someone is born with or have no choice in. However, because bisexual men and women are romantically interested in both men and women, individuals view them as having some degree of choice to their sexual orientation. Perceptions of choice are important because people are more likely to discriminate against a person if they believe that person has a degree of choice to their disadvantaged status, Miz added. He stated that the best solution would be a federal non-discrimination law which includes sexual orientation. Second to that would be changes in societal perceptions of bisexual men and women. Of course, he wasn't as optimistic about changes at the time regarding how, bisexuals are treated in the job arena. Yet, perhaps having more voices speaking about these disadvantages does help. Our culture needs a major U-Haul. I'm just saying. We've talked about the ways in which bi erasure is manifested in media, historically, and through research. But I think it's important to talk about our culture. We all know in the crazy world of the straights, you're either straight until proven gay or gay until proven straight. And we're all a part of some gay agenda, right? Naturally, straight people can barely fathom gay people, let alone bi, pan, ace, and trans people. Yet, somehow, this is also prevalent in the LGBTQ culture. In our culture, it's probably a lot more accepting than the straight community that's more systematically oppressive and suppressive and discriminating against anyone that's different. However, that doesn't mean that the community is perfect, and some of the ideas that we have adapted in our community come from heteronormative values that support oppression. One of the main examples of this tends to be our ideas of gender expression. In our community, feminine men and masculine women have always been a stereotype pinned on gay people and lesbians for years. This is partially due to the fact that many men and women would often dress in drag or androgynously historically to hide while they were with their partner in order to be with their significant other without being tried, jailed, or to avoid facing social stigma. As a result, gender-bending expression has been conflated with sexuality within the culture. But gender-bending stereotypes that gay people have embraced as signifiers of gayness actually only serve to benefit heteronormative ideas of sexuality. It excludes the narratives of masculine gay men while excluding the narratives of feminine straight men. The same with feminine lesbians and masculine straight women. More importantly, these signifiers that many of y'all use does not consider bisexuality, pansexuality, asexuality, and for some reason it doesn't consider trans identity either. Keep in mind that lesbians and gay men were not the only ones dragging back then in history, I promise you. Bi people were also doing the same to be with people that they love or to explore their sexuality. So were ace people, so were trans people. We in the community need to recognize when we are harmfully assuming one's sexuality only on the basis of their gender or gender expression rather than on who they are actually attracted to. First off, it's disrespectful to assume a person is gay or lesbian, especially if they are in a relationship with someone of the opposite gender. You're basically insinuating that they're being deceitful. That's not cool. The same with people assuming that masculine queer men are gay for pay or feminine queer women are using lesbians for attention. Of course, I'll save that topic for another day when I have time, but yeah, that's just one of the examples. If you have the kind of gender expression that I do, I'm more masked in person and I look like a woman to most society that is butch, okay? And as a result, it's really hard to be taken seriously when I tell people I'm bi or pan because people just can't separate my gender expression from my sexuality, even though they're two different things. I could be dating a guy and people would think that he's the beard of my relationship. I get that so many times, it's disgusting and it's frustrating. A character in media or even a real life person that doesn't subscribe to the gender norms tends to always have their sexuality invalidated because of society's stereotypes about what it means to be gay, straight, or even bi. Take Debrat for example. Debrat came out with her girlfriend last year in March of 2020. People immediately assumed Debrat was a lesbian, even though Debrat is bisexual and actually spoke about it in an interview in September 2020. Yet why is it that we assume people like Debrat or Queen Latifah or any other woman who carries himself in a masculine way is lesbian? I mean, Debrat might come out lesbian later, but still, the question is, why do we still assume that, just based off her gender expression? Equally, why do we assume a woman who is feminine is straight? And why is it that people never stop to think about bisexuality in this mix? These ideas, while they may seem harmless, can actually lead to bi erasure. Our assumptions that gender expression is an indicator of one's sexuality actually comes from heteronormative ideas that masculine can only be attracted to feminine and vice versa, which in turn continues the flawed understanding that man/woman are the natural way of doing things. Because masculine is man, feminine is woman, right? Why do you think so many feminine gay men prefer not to date feminine gay men? This is coming from the heteronormative assumption that if you date a man that looks feminine, you're not really gay, which makes no sense whatsoever. But that's what heteronormativity does to you. Equally, there's also the assumption that if a woman is attracted to a feminine man, then that is a sign that she's really a lesbian, which also makes no sense. Are you attracted to the gender expression or the gender? So when you see a masculine girl interested in guys, a feminine girl interested in girls, a feminine guy interested in girls, and a masculine guy interested in guys, most people end up with Pikachu face, okay? Because the heteronormative ideas about sexuality and gender are so wrongfully ingrained in our society that even queer people have adapted these ideas. This is especially the case when the person is bi. The straight dar or the gay dar doesn't seem to work with bi people because we confuse the narrative, making others have to question their thoughts and opinions about who they are and what they're attracted to. The same happens with trans people, but that is a topic for a different day. Regardless, it's also the reason bi-ness is ignored because others can't seem to grasp it. Yet it's heteronormativity that makes it hard to grasp. If you all just focus on what it means to be gay, lesbian, and bi in the first place, who you're attracted to, instead of basing these things on stereotypes of gender expression, this could make things a lot easier. This is not to come down on anyone's preferences or experiences as a queer person. My issue, though, is when you assume your preferences or experiences are the reality of everyone in the community and don't make room for more nuanced ideas. When thinking about the language in the LGBTQ community, bi erasure is definitely a thing. I mean, we know the straight community insists on calling everything the gay agenda. However, even in the LGBTQ plus community, the term gay has been used to describe pretty much every person a part of the pride community. While this term is often used to create solidarity in most cases, unintentionally it actually erases bisexuality from the narrative. Calling things gay marriage or gay rights is isolating. Even gay bars seem to paint the picture that this is an exclusive club for gays only, while the pan bi ace community are often afterthoughts. If you're a non-binary person like me that identifies as both woman and man, it can be kind of an isolating experience. Sure, non-binary people, themselves can be gay or lesbian, but it's always a feeling of not knowing if you'll be accepted when you walk into a club. I wonder if we had an exclusively bi bar, what gay bars would look like now. I'm sure the straight bars would go extinct, but anyway, the way language is used in our community should be addressed when it comes to how erasure takes place. Not to mention, some words used by people in the pride community can be used both to assist bi people and equally harm or delegitimize bi people. For example, the term compulsory heterosexuality. While the term comphet can help us bi people be more aware of bi erasure and internalize biphobia when dealing with same gender attractions, it has been used equally to stigmatize or even delegitimize opposite gender attractions or even trans attractions in the past. Terms like these should be used more carefully, especially because in the midst of these terms, some people are not, making a clear distinction between compulsory heterosexuality and bisexuality for clarity and understanding. Not to mention, bisexuals are often ignored in regards to the conversation surrounding comp het. Bi women experience comp het just as much as lesbians, and the distress surrounding it is higher because when you're bi, it's hard to know whether you're feeling attraction or not. Bi women equally feel the pressure to forego their same gender urges to date men. Bi men might equally forego their same gender urges to date women. Just because they have the potential to fall in love with the opposite gender doesn't mean they like the same gender at the same rate, at the same time, or even in the same way. Yet our experiences are often ignored when speaking about heteronormativity, just because we have the potential to be attracted to the opposite gender. But being attracted to the opposite gender by itself is not heteronormative. Heteronormativity is the idea that heterosexuality alone is the highest standard of being or the only natural state of being. That means monosexism plays a role in establishing heteronormative values. Thus, bi, pan, and ace people are equally affected by it. And shout out to Tallulah Guard here on YouTube, who actually explores in her videos how internalized biphobia jumped out of herself and how straight, ace, and bi women can indeed experience comp het. Anyway, thinking about internet culture, while it has helped many bi people to find ways to make ourselves more visible within our own LGBTQ plus spaces, sometimes bisexuality is often ignored or erased from those conversations as well. Not surprisingly. Even in fandom circles where there is shipping, you have terms like fem/slash to describe same-gender love of women and slash for same-gender love of men. But then when it comes down to opposite gender or other gender love, it is called het, which is basically a shorter form of heterosexual. This term feels demeaning when you think about it because it implies that all relationships that isn't the same gender is automatically heterosexual. This is just one of the ways internet culture erases, isolates, invalidates, or ignores bisexuality. I mean, we need a better name than het. Just because we like the opposite gender doesn't mean we're all heterosexual. Sad to say, but there are some bi people that have so much internalized biphobia that even they don't like to call themselves bi. I do believe people should be allowed to label themselves according to what makes them comfortable. However, I think it's always important to reevaluate if our labels are coming from a sincere need to feel comfort in our sexuality or a sincere feeling of hatred or fear of our own sexuality. It should be of no surprise that a large number of bi people are not out to their friends nor family according to statistics. So many of them mislabel themselves and others because they want to feel accepted by straight people or validated as queer among gay and lesbian people. I also can't help wondering how many straight or gay people actually experience bi feelings, yet refuse to use the word bi to describe themselves because of stigma, shame, or simply bi erasure. I think of the mostly straight guys first and foremost. The struggle to use bi as a term is so strong among, people who call themselves straight, right? they've been using terms like heteroflexible or homoflexible to describe themselves, which these terms by themselves seems to imply that bisexuality doesn't exist, or at least they don't want to have to own up to the fact that they do have bisexual feelings. Now, bi-curious, Adam Lambert's favorite description, at least acknowledge that there is bisexuality. I mean, I used to use that term back in the day too. But I do still feel like that's an attempt to not address bisexual feelings within oneself. Then again, some bi people never even knew it was possible to be bi before their discovery. I think of Jason Mraz, who didn't even know it was possible to be bisexual after he realized he had feelings for men. I mean, his wife had to help him understand that it is possible for a man to be interested in both genders. And I also think about articles like this, where the writer insists they are a lesbian in every way, yet tries to convince others that her wanting to, sleep with Harry Styles still makes her a lesbian. Again, I know people have various reasons why they label themselves the way they do, but I also wonder what is so wrong about admitting bi plus feelings. And why do people go out of their way to avoid these type of feelings or labels? Again, I'm not one for labels myself. Of course, my reason for labeling myself is because if I don't, people would never take my interest in both genders seriously. Therefore, if I had to choose one to describe myself, it would be bisexual or pansexual, mainly because I want people to know that I am sincerely interested in both genders. It's just a sad shame that we even have to label ourselves, but we do, otherwise we're going to be erased, or we're going to be taken as, we're going to be delegitimized. But that's just what it comes down to. I mean, anyway, naturally, I don't expect everyone to see bisexuality the way I do, but I do kind of wonder why so many people avoid using it personally, and I also recognize the social implications of not using it in the world. Perhaps it's as Yoshino stated in his epistemic contract document, he stated this, quote, "To be frank, it is understandable that the heterosexual presumption has received more theoretical attention than the monosexual presumption. The erosion of the presumption that all individuals are heterosexual was obviously necessary to identify the fallback presumption that all individuals are heterosexual or homosexual. The evidence above demonstrates, however, that the monosexual presumption is powerful and urgently requires such attention." So, based on the epistemic contract, in today's society, the problem is that we're still assuming people's sexuality based on the monosexual scale. Heterosexuals will always assume someone is heterosexual, and a lot of us will as well. In fact, most of the world will assume this, unless shown otherwise, which will automatically make people assume the opposite presumption. Yes, people do see things in black and white when they're not thinking, but that is exactly why the pride colors represent the rainbow, to show that sexuality is much more colorful and diverse. So how can we avoid bi erasure? First off, we need to start using more inclusive language. For example, whenever a bi person is in a relationship with someone that is a lesbian, gay, or straight, using terms like multisexual or polysexual to describe such relationships is more appropriate and helps to legitimize and recognize the nuance of the relationship. For those of you who don't know what these terms mean, it just describes anything involving more than one sexuality. And polysexual means to incorporate many different kinds of sexualities. After all, when people of two races are in a relationship, we often call it interracial because it involves more than one race, right? Why can't we do the same for people who are non-monosexual in a relationship with someone who is monosexual? I personally like to use the word queer or LGBTQIA+ to describe characters or people instead of the umbrella term gay, especially if that person has shown interest in more than one gender at one time. There are ways to be inclusive without isolating an entire group of people and without conflating gay men with other sexualities. So I think we should stop using gay as an umbrella term. Perhaps on a structural level, we need to think about also creating spaces that openly embrace bi people, such as using the term pride bars instead of gay or lesbian bars exclusively. Or if some of y'all are pressed about it, perhaps we need to come together to create bars that include people of varying genders and sexualities. It would be kind of nice to walk into a bar knowing that you'll be accepted for your orientation or gender. And as far as in media, we should be more mindful of how we interpret queerness and how that can affect the way bi people are seen and treated as a result. If a fictional character shows bi tendencies, it would be nice if we could acknowledge the elephant in the room. Equally, when a historical figure has shown recorded evidence of bisexuality, we should recognize and acknowledge it. Lastly, we need to be more careful about how we use terminology like comp het and heteronormativity to ensure that we don't use these words to delegitimize bi, pan, and ace and or trans people, and instead include these groups in conversations regarding oppressive systems. And please stop assuming everyone's sexuality based on their gender expression. Sexuality and gender expression are two different things. Speculating someone is secretly gay or lesbian just because of how they express themselves is wrong, especially while you know they are in a relationship with the opposite gender. It's very disrespectful and feels like you are implying someone is being deceitful. It is not homophobic to call you out on that. Speculating someone is gay for pay or trying to get attention while dating the same gender also should stop, because it's also speculating deceit. Okay, feminine women and masculine men can be gay and lesbian and bi. It's better to assume that people have a label that reflects the partners they are attracted to. This will help minimize bi erasure once we leave people open to exploring their own sexuality. Furthermore, educate and call out instances when people are saying biphobic things so that we feel that we are a part of a community that protects us just as much as Lil Nas X is protected by his own community. All these different issues regarding bisexuality led me to want to create YouTube videos for bi people. When I first, was attempting to go through my own bi pansexual journey, I was looking for bi girls and boys all over YouTube. It was very hard to find, mind you. Some of the people who identified as bi now identify as gay, or many of the bi YouTubers would often refer to themselves in their content as gay content. The bi YouTubers I found were great, but most of them had general LGBTQ content that didn't always reflect the exclusive and unique experiences of bi people. I was lucky to find Verily Bitche, who covers for the most part bi material. I don't know if it's the algorithm or just the fact that lesbians and gays are more supported on the platform, but it's pretty clear that when it comes to queer media, bisexuals are completely in the YouTube closet, okay? This is actually one of the reasons why I wanted to start making more bisexual content, especially for Black bisexual people, because I am Black, alright? I want to be more exclusive in the way that I address bisexuality so that others will know that bisexual people's experiences are valid, real, and requires attention because our experiences are unique. I think it's important for bisexual Black people to feel seen and understood as well. We need to stop lumping bisexuals in the same category as all gay and straight people because as statistics have shown, it is having a mental effect on our community. Not to mention Gen Z is rising to be the largest LGBTQ plus group in history, especially as far as bisexuality. We need to be prepared to give bi youth solid ground so they don't feel lost or ashamed of who they are. My goal is to be a part of that change. So, I know this has been a pretty lengthy video, but that's all I have to say on the matter. Definitely leave me a comment in the comment section below. I do plan on making more bi content and videos because it's seriously needed. All of my links are in the description box if you want to know more about the LGBTmap.org file regarding the invisible majority, the epistemic contract on bisexual erasure, as well as the critique on the lesbian film, supposedly lesbian film, Blue is the Warmest Color. And I might be adding more to the description box later because I do have so many different resources that talks about bi erasure and the invisible majority and our disparities in our community. I think it's important to address it. So thank you all for tuning in. I'm glad to be back here on YouTube, and I'm going to be making more of these kind of videos. So make sure y'all hit the notification bell to tune in for the next things I have. But right now, it's out for me. Peace.